Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 2:45 and this hearing session is open. A message went on the website to indicate that this morning's session overran, so we're starting slightly later. My name's Roisin Barrett. I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out an independent examination of the Winchester District Local Plan 2020 to 2040. Jill Taylor's the programme officer. If you've got any query about the running of the examination, please have a word with her or contact her. Details on the website. Phones to silent, please. Toilets on the second floor. We're not expecting a fire alarm. Please follow the green signs and down to Abbey Gardens. And please be mindful that there's trip hazard with leads. Please, when you're making suggestions for modifications to the plan, can you please refer to the four tests of soundness that are in paragraph 35 of the NPPF. Anything else I need to cover? No. Just one housekeeping matter. I received something. I actually don't know who it's from. And perhaps Mr. Fox will introduce it to me at the appropriate time. It's in relation to, sorry, I can see it's in relation to W10.
Yeah, it's.
I would have said it's out of time and that's it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
I thought it was in relation to. Sorry, it was just given to me just before this session, and I thought it was. It's
a bit confusing. Obviously, track changes, and I appreciate obviously it's out the abnormal, but obviously it does relate to River Park, which obviously we had not yet discussed.
Yeah.
But obviously, on reflection, there are some helpful suggestions there. So I don't know whether or not you want us to pick those up when we deal with River Park when we come back after the break. Might be the best way to deal with that. It's from I don't know who it's from. It's
okay, so what you're saying is that it's brought something to your attention that you'd like to put into a main.
That's it.
That's a legitimate approach, so we can do away with this.
We'll put for
do as you see fit and put them to us at the relevant session. So I'll put that to one side. I'm sorry, I thought it was in relation. To this session. That's why I raised it. Okay, well, let's move on. We're dealing with the historic environment. And an issue I know very important in this district. And what you've got is a whole range of policies. You set out your strategic approach in HE1, and then you've got some 13 subsequent policies, and it's the same point. What you do is you pick up on various different aspects or various different areas of the historic environment, and it's an issue that I've raised several times before. I understand how important this issue is. I have no problem with that whatsoever. The strategy as a whole, I found very confusing when I read it, because you've got your overarching policy and then you've got various, you've got your HE3, which relates to designated heritage assets, and various times you pick up on designated heritage assets. So you've got HE8, you've got HE9, you've got HE10, that all deal with those in different ways. So it's just a general point, and it's up to me to decide where that crosses into a soundness issue or an effectiveness issue. But I'd just be, and it's a question that runs through my thoughts on this chapter. So I'll just give the council just to summarise your response to that, please.
Thank you, Mum. We appreciate that lots of the questions that you've directed towards us are about whether we've repeated things too frequently in our policies and whether we are consistent with the framework.
Yeah.
We would say that the suite of policies we've presented, when including the modifications that we're proposing, we think that there are overlaps between the policies, but we don't think there's actual repetition. Invariably, we want to try and have a plan that is as comprehensive as possible and addresses all the different range of heritage assets that exist within the district, but also addresses the issues that we face specific to Winchester. Particularly one of the points you've raised is about how with policies HE3 and HE4, about why do we have policies that, I think the gist of what you were aiming at was why do they repeat the framework? Our view is that the policies actually help to clarify the framework. So taking HE3, for example, you'll be aware as a heritage professional that some of the phrases in the framework are not particularly easy for many people to understand. Substantial harm, less than substantial harm, these are not the most helpful words. What we've tried to do in the plan is to make it clearer what those phrases actually mean. So when we talk about in HE3 about the most severe level of harm, which is substantial harm, and then all other harm, we think the policies that we've presented add to the NPPF rather than conflict with it.
Okay, I hear what you say, and the argument that's very often put to me is that you want development plan status to those things, which are, the framework is a material consideration. By putting them in here, having those policies, you've got elevating it to development plan status. No, I completely get that. I mean, usually when you're looking at a historic environment chapter, you've got one overarching policy that sets out your strategic approach as set out in the framework to heritage assets. Then you might have one on conservation areas, one on listed buildings, one on parks and gardens, one on archaeology, one on buildings at risk, maybe. That's it. Here we've got 14 or something, and it's that balance, isn't it? It's not that I'm not 100% behind the sentiment here, because it's something that's extremely important to the district. So I just flag that, and that's sort of running through the comments that I have on the policies. So okay, I've heard what you've said. So in terms of the strategy, well, tell me, what is your strategic approach to heritage assets? Because that's what the framework says. You need to set a positive strategy for the conservation and enjoyment of, well, tell me, pick off how you've done this. So first of all, set out a positive strategy for the conservation and enjoyment of the historic environment. That needs to be based on adequate and up-to-date evidence. It needs to contain strategic policies, and we've got HE1 here, no question about that. And then identify land where development would be inappropriate. For example, you often see it in relation to tall buildings and things like that. The view management framework, for example, in London. So tell me, in that context, and you can refer to Historic England advice notes if you want, but tell me, what is your strategy?
We believe that our strategy is all about conservation rather than preservation. We're not here trying to stop people making changes to historic buildings and within historic places. We're trying to ensure that change happens in a careful and considered manner, so that the heritage assets that we are very fortunate to be the custodians of can be passed down to those who come after us. We emphasise that this is not a task that the City Council can accomplish by itself. Although we do own a number of historic buildings, not least the one in which we're now sat, we do have to work with partners, developers, community groups, and we do that. And that the emphasis is trying to sustain heritage assets in a way that is consistent for their long-term use, so that people can continue to enjoy them. But we'd also emphasise that strategic policy HE1 is not just about how we determine planning applications, it's about the wider activities of the council as a whole, as a body that promotes best practice, that tries to help homeowners to make their buildings more efficient, that tries to ensure that Winchester remains attractive as a destination for tourists. So there's a whole wealth of different aspects to our strategic approach, which we believe are set out in HE1.
Okay, and what about your evidence base?
So our evidence base is formed from our suite of conservation area appraisals. We have a buildings at risk register, which we maintain regularly. We can point to evidence from the sorts of planning applications that we deal with, and the way in which we address those and frequent issues that arise. We can also point to our engagement with different community groups and wider groups such as Historic England about different issues. So as an example of how we're committed to try and improve the quality of our historic environment, in the last year and a half, we've removed 4 conservation areas from the Historic England Heritage at Risk Register. We've removed 1 scheduled monument and 2 Grade 2 star listed buildings.
Conservation areas?
Correct.
Oh. Sorry, which ones? I'm just interested.
Off the top of my head, one was Southwark, which is in the south of the district. There was another one which was, I think it was New Alresford. There was Compton Street, and one other which name escapes me.
Okay, so, because of course that evidence base needs to go way beyond what's on hers, doesn't it? And so, okay, I understand that, and indeed I've had a look at that. Tell me the strategy. So this again, the strategy needs to go beyond just the conservation of buildings. It needs to sort of go through the whole plan. So, for example, how are your economic policies dealing with economic growth? How are those furthering the aims of heritage and vice versa? You know, so can you tell me, how is heritage furthering the aims of the plan? You need more homes. What's it doing there? That's the sort of approach that one would be looking for a sound approach to the historic environment.
Certainly. So much of our supporting text in lots of the other chapters of the plan does refer to the value that we give to the historic environment, not just in a sort of significant sense, but also financially in terms of the way it contributes to the well-being of the people who live in our district and the people who visit it. I'm sure my colleagues in strategic planning can speak more about the economics specifically, but it is very much woven throughout the policy.
For example, don't you?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, if I may add to that, from our useful exchanges over the past couple of years, there are elements in how the council approaches energy efficiency in buildings, where we've spoken about recognising in the plan, in the energy efficiency section, the special consideration that needs to be made to traditionally constructed buildings, and also in the natural environment section. I caught the tail end of the session this morning, where there was some questions around reference to heritage considerations being interwoven into that. And so these are other elements that I think help to permeate heritage as a golden thread throughout the plan.
Okay. Anything else that anyone wishes to say on that? Let's move on to the policies then. So you've got H1, we've spoken about that, and you've told me that that sets out your overall approach. As much as anything, a statement of intent, isn't it? The council will work with partners, developers and the local community to ensure that decisions affecting heritage assets and their settings are based on sound understanding of the significance, etc., etc. So it puts significance right there. Are there any suggested MMs?
So in respect of policy HE2,
hold on.
are we on HE2?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
HE1.
Yeah, main mod 31, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
Just the removal of historic in regards to registered parks and gardens. And that was comments made by Historic England.
Where's that? Please?
Replacement of, so MM31
Oh,
in the
paragraph
supporting 8.4. Instead of historic, we've got registered parks and gardens.
Yes.
It's just a
Okay.
replacement of one word, but that's
Okay.
all for HE1.
I don't have any question on that. Okay, and then we deal with H2. And what this does, it relates to both designated and non-designated heritage assets, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
Okay, and it sets out what should underpin any. Do you want to introduce the policy? What should underpin any application affecting a heritage asset?
Certainly. The emphasis is all about ensuring that applicants provide sufficient information to enable decision makers to make informed decisions. The only amendment that we've made to this policy, as far as I'm aware, is the one that was suggested by Historic England to bring us slightly more into consistency with the framework about including any contribution made by their setting, which is main modification 32.
Okay, and what that's getting at is the three-step approach, isn't it? So you identify what the heritage assets are, you identify their significance, including any contribution of setting to the heritage assets, the impact of development, and then you assess it basically, and then you go on to do the heritage balance. Okay, I don't have any questions on that as it stands. Does anybody else want to raise anything?
Not any comments from a concern or concerns, as it were, but being a pedant, as Adrian and his colleagues know, I have inclinations to be. There's a repetition in the paragraph, the second paragraph, all applications, where there's reference to heritage assets and or their settings. And when I was rereading again in recent weeks, I was inclined to suggest that be aligned with that similar consideration, including any contribution to significance made by their setting rather than and or their setting, to avoid the implication that the setting is somehow separate from heritage significance.
I mean, it is correct.
Yeah.
What? I'm sorry. What?
Guy. Yeah.
Mr. Robinson.
Guy. Yeah.
It's it is correct.
Mm.
You know.
We agree.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was the
So it's contribution through the setting, and that's in the policy text.
yes, in the second paragraph. And then was there not also a proposed change at the end of that second paragraph relating to heritage risk?
Correct. Yes. Thank you for reminding me.
Relating to
Buildings at risk.
any proposals for heritage assets included in council's building bridge list or Historic England's heritage at risk register.
So I believe one of Mr. Robinson's initial observations was perhaps we were being a little bit ambitious by saying that that through the planning application process we will be able to remove buildings from the heritage at risk register when things are perhaps rather more complicated than that. Our suggested amendment, and this is our own wording rather than Historic England's, is to improve the condition of those buildings rather than enable removal from the registers. The reason being, were I playing devil's advocate, one way to remove a historic building from a register of buildings at risk is to demolish it, which is clearly not what we wish to achieve.
Is that your concern with the existing wording?
No, not at all. It's
No.
just finessing the wording slightly.
Okay. Yes, or contribute to the removal of that heritage asset from whatever. I mean, we're not going to make policy on the hoof. I'll leave that with you. Okay, thank you. And then let's move on to H3. Right, so this relates to all designated heritage assets, and basically it sets out what the framework is for decision making, isn't it? In terms of less than substantial harm and substantial harm. I mean, very often you get policies that will say something like the council will determine applications in accordance with the framework, something like that. It's your plan, etc. Do you want to say anything about this policy? It sets out your approach to decision making, which is in accordance with the MPPF.
All I can say is refer you back to my earlier statement about trying to clarify the distinction between substantial and less substantial. We think that's helpful for people who don't live in the heritage world perhaps as much as people like Guy and I do.
Yeah, okay. I understand that. I don't have any further questions on that. Anybody else? Mr. Robinson?
The most minor of points, it's a footnote that is referenced within policy HE3. Footnote 1 refers to registered battlefields, grade 1 and grade 2 star registered parks and gardens, but it omits grade 1 and grade 2 star listed buildings. And I think that should be in there as it were.
In accordance with the framework.
Yeah, in accordance with the framework. So it's a minor tweak needed to footnote 1.
I mean, it does say the council will apply the relevant policy in the MPPF when assessing. Oh, okay. Yeah, it goes to the reasons that I was suggesting that in accordance with the framework, but just make sure that it's correct. That's the point. That's the footnote. Just check it and make sure it's correct. Okay, and then we move on to non-designated heritage assets, and again, this is saying, it'll be a balanced judgment, which is exactly what the framework says, isn't it? What's the point of policy?
The observation being that the vast majority of the heritage assets in our district are non-designated. Yeah. We think it would be wrong to have a plan that was silent about those issues. Winchester's known for some amazing designated assets, but we think we do need to have a comprehensive approach, which is why we've included this. In lots of ways, policies HE3 and HE4 are complementary. If you don't have one, then we think you wouldn't have the other.
And it gives it development plan status. That's the
the
reason to put those sorts of things in. Okay, hear what you say. You've heard what I've said. HE5. Now, this is where we get a little bit complicated. So this deals with all heritage assets in terms of heritage loss, really, doesn't it? And then it says, okay, if the significance of heritage assets whose significance is harmed wholly in part, what you should do. It's about recording, basically. So do you want to introduce this policy and tell me why it's there, etc.?
Certainly. So when we talked about the previous policies, HE3 and HE4 aim to avoid harm to heritage assets, but acknowledge that sometimes that harm is justified in accordance with the framework, in which circumstance you make a balanced decision. HE5 actually goes into that balanced decision in a little bit more detail, we think, through setting out when you can't avoid the harm, how do we intend to address those situations through mitigation, which is often an archaeological consideration, but also ensuring that public benefits that are realised through heritage harm actually come to fruition. So I think that this particularly responds to issues relating to conservation areas where you might be demolishing a building, but ensuring that the replacement building does come forwards. But also, this policy refers to the Winchester.
Sorry, if I can just, so you've got a policy on that, haven't you? Oh, demolition.
We do, yes.
HE11.
Yes, but it's not specific. The HE5 would encapsulate other scenarios in addition to that, but that was an illustration of.
Sorry, give me another scenario.
Certainly. So
lots of conservation area.
So archaeologically, Archaeological excavation, particularly developing in the city centre, is almost always necessary, given the richness of the archaeological resource we have. That excavation is inherently destructive. Once the archaeology is out of the ground, it's not being preserved in situ. So in that scenario, we are frequently in the position of having to mitigate the impact on archaeology through excavation, recording, and public dissemination of the results.
Okay, so HE6 and HE7 deal with that situation, do they not?
They do, yes.
Sorry, just so what's HE5 doing?
It provides an overarching approach that sets out that we expect harm to be mitigated. Where harm is inevitable, it must be mitigated.
Okay, but that's in
It might.
It's in HE2, isn't it?
Yes. Perhaps the two examples I've given are less than helpful because I've spoken about things that are covered elsewhere in the plan.
Okay.
But I don't think the application of HE5 is just specific to conservation areas or to archaeology. It could be applied in relation to the loss of other heritage assets, listed buildings, non-designated structures, parks and gardens, which don't have necessarily policies that are phrased in quite that way, in the sense we don't have a policy about the demolition of listed buildings because we don't generally conceive of such things, but we don't think the plan shouldn't have any teeth to manage that situation should it ever arise.
Okay. Hear what you say. So, sorry. So this policy would bite if you had a situation where, I don't know, total loss of an asset.
Yes.
Sorry, can I will not permit the loss of the whole or part of a heritage asset without being satisfied the harm is unavoidable. Appropriate mitigation measures and all reasonable steps have been taken to ensure the new development will proceed after the loss has occurred. Significance of a heritage asset whose significance is harmed should be recorded, understanding advance. This recording should be carried out appropriately, basically, and then it should be on the her. Okay, that then, okay, let's go on to HE6. When we go on to consider the other policies, we'll come back to that. So this is the next one is HE6. This is scheduled monuments, not scheduled ancient monuments, as I put, scheduled monuments, which is the correct term. And nationally important non-designated assets. Now, my understanding is that this is dealing with non-designated archaeological assets. Is that right? Ah.
Yes, ma'am. Tracy Matthews, the archaeologist for the council. Yes, policy HE6 deals with scheduled monuments and non-designated archaeological assets, which are of national significance, but for various reasons may or may never be scheduled.
Yes.
And obviously may be identified through the planning process, and in accordance with the framework should be treated as though they are of the same significance. We feel that the proposed policy and the modifications, which address the comments from a statutory consultee, they add clarity and strengthen the policy and the supporting text, and they make it a more effective policy.
Sorry, you've gone on. You're looking at
I think Tracy's referring to main modification 33.
Yes, sorry, apologies. I'm referring to the policy and main modifications 33.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you just explain what the policy does?
The policy is aimed at identifying that nationally significant archaeological assets, many of which occur within the city, are treated the same as scheduled monuments, and therefore are the weight given to their preservation is much higher than for non-designated.
Okay, so it's clearly got the hierarchy there to avoid,
Yes, yeah,
very clearly set out in the framework to avoid
Yeah.
and minimise, and says what evidence should justify that in a development coming
yes,
forward.
and that early discussion should be held with, for development proposals should be held with the council and the council's archaeological
Yourself
advisor.
and Historic England
Yeah,
for scheduled monuments and yourself.
yes,
And it says that consulted on proposals that have the potential to affect either type of asset to determine what evidence would be required.
yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then it sets out how your decision making will take place in accordance with
Yes,
HE3.
I mean, we have requirements for an expanded desk-based assessment and impact assessment relating to urban waterlogged deposits on our website.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Sorry, yeah, we have an environment where we've got deeply stratified, often waterlogged archaeological assets within the city, which can be significantly harmed through development. And so often our requirements for both desk-based assessment and evaluation are very specific and bespoke, and therefore it's important that that early engagement with ourselves
Okay.
takes place.
Mr. Robinson, I didn't say, if you do want to come in at all, and I'm looking this way, if you just raise your nameplate like that, I'll know that you want to come in, and I'll bring you in. Sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. Thank you. And as you said, you're suggesting a number of amendments to this policy, and the first one does deal with one of my queries about the what it's relating to. And it says you're suggesting an amendment to the title to say non-designated archaeological assets, aren't you?
Yes, this is
Yeah.
responding directly to a suggestion from Historic England or comments from the statutory consultee to clarifying that this policy is directly relating to scheduled monuments and nationally important non-designated archaeological assets and not a wider range of heritage assets.
Okay, get that. And then the next one, proposal should take a positive approach to archaeology by avoiding.
Yes, I mean, this sets out our expectations that driven by information that's provided by developers on how their proposal may impact archaeology, is that they're expected to, within the design process, undertake the three-step hierarchy of mitigation and to provide sufficient information to the council to make an informed planning decision.
Okay, I've got that. The next one.
Again, this is just a minor clarification from Historic England, where it's referring to not only a scheduled monument and or its set, but also its setting.
What does the wording say at the moment? Oh, so at the moment.
Yeah, it's saying that the steps would be taken to avoid and minimise harm, and the suggested wording is that where harm is unavoidable, proposals should explain the reasons why and outline the steps to minimise that harm.
Yes, sorry, I'm on.
Oh, sorry. The
yes,
major modification is that would be the steps would be taken to avoid harm, which is the key first step.
And or if the proposals may affect the scheduled monument and or its setting.
Yes.
Sorry, so why is that necessary?
That was in response to comments from Historic England that they should be consulted where proposals may affect a scheduled monument, not only directly but indirectly through harm to it, potential harm to its setting.
Through. Okay. Okay, so Historic England want to come in here?
Only insofar as supporting the main modifications proposed. I think there was a risk in the submission plan that it implied avoidance and minimisation were on a par, and through the main modifications, it sets out clearly at the front, avoidance is the top priority, and then comes on to where harm is unavoidable, what to do. And the slight amendment around engaging with Historic England around scheduled monument consent, I think is born of phrasing I suggested early on around notifying us, but in reality, we're keen to engage at an early stage if there's the potential for harm to a scheduled monument, and there's not as it were, a formal notification point, as you will know. So it's about that additional change was to elicit that encouragement for early engagement if there's the potential for harm to a scheduled monument.
Okay, it
reach out to us.
doesn't say that though, does it? It just says that you should be notified. Historic England should be notified where a scheduled monument consent is required in addition to planning permission, and or if the proposals may affect a scheduled monument and or its setting. It doesn't say early on in the process or anything like that, does it? I mean, it might be. Does anybody have any comments on that?
Ma'am, although not explicit in current policy or the proposed policy, it's standard practice that at pre-application stage, if that happens, we and a scheduled monument or potentially nationally important archaeological remains may be affected. We do always recommend that the planning officer consults with Historic England, but also that the applicant undertakes specific pre-application directly with Historic England.
So, sorry, who is this directed at? Is it directed at your own people or is it applicants? Because it would be unusual to have something in policy that's saying what case officers should do, isn't it? Or is that directed as applicants? Just a statement that Historic England should be notified. It doesn't say by who.
My reading of the policy is, as a non-heritage expert, is that onus is on the applicants, basically to notify.
That's how I took it. Sorry, that's why.
But I think what my colleague is saying is, obviously, if we deal with something through the pre-app process, our response, with rounded response, would say, here's the City Council's response, but we would also encourage you to speak to Historic England because obviously we recognise that they would have a role to that. So I think there's kind of a blurring of the two, but that wording is for applicants.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Does anybody else want to say anything on? We've already spoken about the avoiding harm, and if it's unavoidable, we do it.
There is just one other main modification, Mum, in the additional modifications, just to draw your attention to paragraph 8.11.
Yeah.
On page 6. It's basically introducing some new supported text.
Yep. Sorry, can you just introduce that?
I think that's just we feel it's helpful clarification about how we would deal with obviously the application. So basically, obviously, non-designated heritage assets which demonstrated equivalent significance and scheduled monument should be considered subject to policy. So it's a clarification, hopefully, to applicants to say treat them the same, please.
Okay. Let's move on to H7, and this deals with non-designated archaeological assets and sets out avoidance and mitigation where harm is unavoidable. Would somebody from the council like to introduce this policy and tell me how clearly set out how it differentiates from H6. I know it's in relation just to non-designated and the other policies in the plan, what it adds.
This, as you say, Mom, refers to non-designated archaeological assets of less than national importance. Archaeology in the district and city is incredibly diverse and rich, and it's important, therefore, we feel that there is a policy directed specifically at those heritage assets. It sets out our requirements and provides further detail to that within the framework in terms of expectations for developers and planning applications. It sets out that we encourage early discussion and detailed discussions about the information requirements that may be required for a planning application. It also specifically brings to the fore the historic environment record, which is now a statutory requirement within policy terms, and in its role in facilitating effective decision making and the provision of information back to the historic environment record, dissemination of information and bringing that public value arising from development to the fore within the planning process.
But all of that stuff in H7 that you're requiring, which is all good stuff, that's also necessary for any designated asset, isn't it?
Yes.
Sorry, why is there a specific requirements for non-designated archaeological assets when they would also relate to designated archaeological assets?
As has been alluded to with other heritage assets, we feel it's important that designated and nationally significant archaeological assets are dealt with their own policy terms, and non-nationally significant archaeological remains are also supported by policy.
Is it sorry, the point I'm making is that there's probably more detail in HE7 with regards to what would justify any proposal when compared to HE6.
I think HE6 very much stresses, because of it's dealing with nationally significant remains, it's very much stressing that hierarchy of mitigation,
Okay.
which
Yeah, I mean,
it's more so in terms of weighing the balance of in terms of determination.
Okay, I understand. Are you suggesting any changes? Oh, yes, you are.
So, Mum, we refer you to proposed modification 53,
Yeah.
which just deletes the first sentence.
53. Oh, 34.
Sorry, it's probably
Yeah,
I'm looking.
yeah. You're looking at the old one
Wrong
probably.
document, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. That's okay. I've got it in front of me.
And just to highlight, Mum, we think there's been an error in MM34 in the second paragraph.
Yeah.
After it says assets to be lost wholly or in part in policy HE7, we don't think policy HE7 and its title is included. It should just go straight from wholly or in part.
I'm sorry, I can't see where you are at all. Are you in this document?
In the main modifications document. Got
Right.
the MM. So
MM34?
yes, yeah.
Right. So where should I be there?
So
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
that just needs to be deleted. Yeah,
Oh, I see.
but we'll reflect that in the main modification.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's not. Is that in the plan? Not sure. Just make sure that it's correct.
I don't believe it is in the plan, Mum.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Okay. No, it's not. It's not. Okay, and then you're taking some text out, aren't you? Where development affecting archaeological assets is permitted, developers will be required to record an advanced understanding of any assets to be lost.
Yes,
Could
Mark,
you
that
explain that?
yes, so that was highlighted to us by Mr. Robinson after a few conversations. It's a complete replication of the prior paragraph. So I think we just entered that in. It's a duplication,
Okay,
essentially. So we're just
Okay.
removing that.
right, it's not a complete duplication, is it? Is there anything in that that needs to be retained? It's got the results and analysis and investigation should be published and provided to the local authority for inclusion in the Winchester Herald. Are you intending getting rid of that as well?
Yes, so that is the same paragraph just above. It's the exact same wording, Mum.
Oh,
It's as if it's
you
been
mean. Oh,
duplicated. Yeah,
I see what you mean.
incorrectly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I understand. Okay, let's move on to policies HE8 and HE9. First of all, dealing with HE8 that deals with applications affecting listed buildings.
We believe this policy just provides some specific considerations that are relevant to listed buildings but are not codified anywhere else. So specifically talking about things like preserving original fabric and requiring a higher standard of design than might be acceptable anywhere else.
Okay, and so you've got HE3 that deals with that.
We do,
Okay.
but HE3 doesn't include that precise level of detail about those specific considerations for listed buildings.
It doesn't, and it doesn't include the requirement for high quality design, but your design policies do across the board. You're requiring high standard of design, whether it's a heritage asset or not, aren't you?
We are. I suppose I'd be slightly biased as the heritage officer and say, actually, I think that listed buildings perhaps merit an even higher standard of design than anywhere else in the plan.
Okay, that's not what you're saying, is it? You're saying design quality of a high standard will be expected to ensure preservation of the building's significance, because you're already, that all the D policies are requiring a high standard of design, aren't they?
Yes, they are. One could perhaps say that there will be instances where a proposal wouldn't require planning permission, but only requires listed building consent. So perhaps the decision maker might naturally not necessarily interrogate the design policies quite so rigorously and perhaps focus more on the heritage policies. So nonetheless, you might think it's slightly repetitive, but we don't think it's not worth including here.
Okay. And then that's linking an understanding of significance as well, isn't it?
Yes.
To the design. Okay, I've got that. And then we've got changes of use to listed buildings. So exactly the same. What's the purpose of this policy other than to give guidance on changes of use to listed buildings?
We've intended this as a positively worded policy to try and help people dealing with changes of use to listed buildings to actually approach it in the right way to achieve a more successful outcome. When we refer you to the 4 criteria within that policy, outlining specific things that we think need to be looked at early on in the process. It's about being helpful and achieving a more positive result than perhaps might otherwise be the case, but also giving decision makers a clear steer on the things that they must be thinking about in assessing those sorts of applications.
Okay. Yeah, so 2 of those things are covered by HE3, aren't they? I get what you're saying, deal comprehensively with the intended use and operation of the whole building and site, absolutely. And then the building is structurally capable of accommodating the use. The other matters are dealt with in HE3, aren't they? Propose a use which would not be harmful to the significance, including setting.
Yes, but in that vein, the entire heritage chapter talks about not harming significance, so I don't think it's particularly problematic to have it here.
Okay, does Historic England want to come in on this? Are you suggesting a change?
Only in so far as the flow of the criteria might be aided by exchanging criterion 3 with a criterion 2, and
Okay.
and then the final 2 criteria refer to where there would be no harm caused, or, and you add the word or, right, sub-criterion 4, demonstrate how any unavoidable harm. Beyond that, I don't have any further comments on this policy.
Sorry, the or.
So I'm
Sorry,
suggesting
that's-
potentially criterion 2 and 3 are swapped in
Yeah,
order,
no, I get that.
and then propose a use which would not be harmful to the significance of the building, including its setting, and add or at the end there. So that's an alternative to the final sub-criterion 4, where demonstrate how any unavoidable harm to the significance of the building is justified.
Okay. If you were to do that, you need to make it very clear which criteria are required, i.e. they're inclusive, an inclusive list, and which ones are or. You just, that's the only point there. I don't really have a view on that, and certainly I'm not going to get involved in whether 2 and 3 where they sit. That's a matter
Sure.
for you, and you can do that through an AM if you wish to. Okay, and then we deal with demolition in conservation areas.
Sorry, Mum, are you skipping one? Development and conservation areas.
Straight away.
You need to get home, isn't it? Okay. The query I had here was the way in which, within conservation areas, development proposals which conserve or enhance the character and significance, appearance, or special architectural or historic interest of the area.
I believe this wording relates to the way we've tried to reconcile the different phrasing that exists in the 1990 Act and the NPPF, trying to include it all because we are required to address all of those documents, but codifying it in one place here.
Does anybody else have any comment on that? Is it clear?
I think so. I think these are all words that
Which conserve or enhance the character and significance.
yes, well, interpreting conserve as to do no harm.
Yeah. Well, usually we say conserve or enhance.
Yeah.
Don't we? That's the usual wording. Conserve on character or appearance.
I don't think the council have a particularly strong view on this. If you felt it was particularly important that we change this wording, but equally, I don't think it's particularly confusing. I think the aim of what we're trying to achieve here is still clear in the policy.
Okay, hear what you say. In relation to my note here. incorporate any energy efficiency or energy generation measures into the design of proposals in a manner that is that has an acceptable impact on the character or appearance. You see, that's where it gets confusing.
Understood.
With what you've got there. Look, can you look at that?
Okay.
Can you look at that and see if there's anything that's causing a problem within that policy? But that's one example where that wording may lead one into confusion. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to say on that policy?
No, I believe we're fine on that one, Lam.
Okay, well, let's then move on to demolition. Okay, and this is another one, sorry, on terminology. Right, sorry. Right, so this is another one, makes, if we look at criteria 1, so what this policy is trying to do, or what it's aiming to do, is it's dealing with that situation where you have the loss of something and you want to make sure that that's clearly tied to the provision of something else. And it also sets out in what circumstances demolition is likely to be acceptable. Can we just turn to, it's that right? That's another policy, isn't
That's
it?
correct.
So can we just turn to criteria 1, makes no positive contribution to the character or appearance and significance.
So perhaps,
yeah, you see, just the terminology I think needs to be, because it doesn't, what it doesn't say is historic interest, does it?
yes,
Yeah.
I think perhaps this policy, the wording, the order of those particular words is perhaps better. Character or appearance, or character, perhaps it should be character and appearance, comma, or significance, on the basis that a building may make no contribution to character and appearance, but could still be very significant.
Explain that.
In the sense that if you have a building which is significant because of the events that have taken place in it, but it's a particularly unattractive building or has been badly altered in such a way that it's considered harmful in its current form to the character and appearance of a conservation area, that building may be significant, but one could argue it makes a negative effect or make a negative contribution.
Would do if it had significance. It has significance. It has significance. It doesn't matter what that significance is, whether it's because of the way that it's been used or.
Yes, but that's, as we understand it, not the way that the statutory requirement operates in terms of section 72 of the Act, about which is limited to character and appearance. Obviously, significance.
Oh, sorry, because significance would be character. In that circumstance, would it not? Would it not be part of character?
Yes, but sorry, I probably dug myself into a hole here. I was trying to make a point that a building can be significant for reasons other than its appearance. So we think it's important to have all the words
Which
in
would
there.
be its character. Character is a much wider term than appearance, isn't it?
Yes, yes. We take your point.
Oh, I think you just need to look at those terms and make sure that they're saying what they should be saying. So I'll make a note that you'll be looking at HE10 and HE11. Just the terms that are used, and if it comes up anywhere else. Is there anything else that anybody? Oh, sorry, I did. Right, views in and out. Sorry, makes no positive contribution. Sorry, I'm on criteria 1 again, and this is where. Sorry, so within a conservation area, planning permission will only be granted for proposals involving demolition, whole and in part, where. it makes no positive contribution to character or appearance significance. We dealt with that either individually or part of a group, or in more general views within or from outside the conservation area. And this is a genuine question. Is that correct? And is it proportionate? Views in, but views from outside, within, or from outside.
I believe it's correct, Mum, in the sense that
General views within, okay, within
yeah,
the area.
but referring to our evidence base, our conservation area appraisal maps identify key views.
Yeah.
And some of those views might well be views from a point that is strictly speaking outside of the boundary of the conservation area, but looks into that conservation area, and that view is a key positive feature which contributes to its special character and appearance.
Yeah.
I think that's where we were getting at with this
Okay.
wording.
Is anybody able to help on that?
I think what my colleague is trying to say is obviously the public rights of way, especially obviously if you're in an elevated thing, you look down onto a conservation area, and that's what we're trying to basically.
Absolutely, views to the
Yeah.
cathedral, for example.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what you're trying to. Yes, it's the wording. No, completely get that. Or in more general views within or from outside. Yeah, maybe. I suppose I was thinking to, or in more general views within or to the conservation. I'll leave it with you. Can you look at that? I'm not sure. I haven't. I'll need to consider that further. But if you could please look at that. I'm sorry.
That's what I'm just thinking.
Yeah. Sorry, what did you say there?
Just thinking at that word, you could say in more general views within the conservation area, or into the conservation area from outside it.
Yeah, that's basically what you want to say, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, well, and we'll leave that to you. So registered parks and gardens. Would you like to introduce that policy?
Thank you, Mum. This is a policy aimed at completeness to ensure that our plan addresses all different sorts of heritage and is not strictly limited to architectural features. We believe it addresses all the main considerations that one would have in thinking about impacts on parks and gardens. There is only one main modification to this policy, which is main modification 35. One of my colleagues. So that is midway through the policy, instead of saying registered historic park or garden, it's just saying registered park or garden, which is the correct title. And then we've added or a park or garden, and then identified on local registers, including the Hampshire.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that was one of my questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so that clarifies this deals with registered parks and gardens and any local designation as well.
Correct.
Sorry, that was.
And there is an additional modification which Mr. Fox has just directed me to, referring back to policy HE3, which states after park and garden and any associated designated heritage assets in accordance with policy HE3, proposals that conserve or enhance a park or garden identified on local registers, including the Hampshire Gardens Trust Register of Parks, Gardens and Green Spaces, will be supported. And we have deleted the final part of that sentence for clarity.
Sorry, where is that?
It's main modification 35.
Sorry, what paragraph is that?
It's at the end of the paragraph, which is, it's the first paragraph.
841.
Yeah, 841, first paragraph. And
It's actually in the policy, isn't it? I think it's the policy.
It's the policy HE12.
Okay. Sorry, can you read that out again, please?
Certainly. So the amended wording to HE12 from the top is proposals which accord with the development plan will be permitted, provided they conserve and stroke or enhance the significance of a the significance or distinctive character of a registered park or garden and any associated designated heritage assets in accordance with policy HE3. Full stop. Proposals that conserve and stroke or enhance a park or garden identified on local registers, brackets, including the Hampshire Gardens Trust Register of Parks, Gardens and Green Spaces, will be supported.
Okay, so it's modifying that text. I'll need to take a look at that. What's the reason for that, please?
I believe this is response to suggestions made by Historic England. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, well, let's go to you then.
That's correct.
Stand down.
Yeah, thank you. Simply in as far as in the submission plan for this policy, I think it's a bit muddy, the distinction between registered parks and gardens and those on a local register.
I
And
agree
I'm
with
trying
that,
to
yeah.
separate out the two, but I welcome the reference of associated designated heritage assets in combination with the RPG reference. So I've just suggested trying to demodify, if that's a word, that opening section. Clarify is better than demodify.
Sorry, so I want to look at that wording in more detail.
That wording, ma'am, is included in the document ED31 that was published. It's the is it the addendum to
Yes.
that sets it out.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anything else anybody wishes to say on that? Okay, let's deal with HE13, which is a locally specific policy and good for you. So non-designated historic, rural and industrial heritage assets. So can you introduce this policy, please?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, as you've identified, it responds to local circumstances, noting that we are a largely rural district, but we exist in a context of changing agricultural practices and also small industrial practices, which yield buildings that were once had an original function for which they may no longer be suited. So this policy is intended to try and ensure that in making decisions about changes to those sorts of buildings, that we take account of their particular special characteristics which contribute to their significance.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have any questions on that. Okay. And let's move on. Any suggested mods to that one?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And H14. Now, this is one in relation to the energy efficiency of historic assets, heritage assets. You're going to change that to, aren't you?
Correct.
But,
yes.
Just explain that, please.
We recognise that to address the climate crisis, and noting that this council has declared a climate emergency, historic buildings have a key role to play in achieving our goals. But to do this, we will need to retrofit a huge number of historic buildings, and this policy is designed to ensure that, firstly, we are providing guidance to those applying for permissions for such things, but secondly, to ensure that we are consistent in the way in which we approach decision making in relation to these sorts of proposals. We know that responsible retrofit of historic buildings is possible, but it can be difficult, and if done badly, it can be really rather catastrophic. So it's trying to avoid that process whilst showing that the council is very clearly aware of this and wishes to make positive progress on this. Often we will find people might say historic buildings are incompatible with combating the climate crisis, and we plainly disagree. We also refer you specifically to this policy to one of the documents in our evidence base, which is our Historic Buildings Energy Efficiency Guide, which we think supports the implementation of this policy.
So what you say is any proposals which harm the structural integrity, character or significance of the building, including through its setting, are clearly outweighed by public benefits as set out in HE3. Is that clear? About, public benefits. It's got, substantial public benefits.
Yes, we believe so.
Yeah, okay, go on.
Just to direct you to, we have a main modification suggested for the first bullet point, which is to read the whole thing. The proposals represent an appropriate strategy for the individual historic building based on, and this is the new text, a whole building approach that takes account of the building's fabric and location, as well as the needs of its occupants. Proposals should conserve or enhance key features of special interest where possible and minimise and justify unavoidable harm. Minimise and justify unavoidable harm. Full stop.
So as well as the needs of its occupants.
Correct.
Okay, go on, explain that.
So this relates to best practice in achieving responsible retrofit. So Historic England's recommended approach for historic buildings is a whole house approach to retrofit, which contrasts with the approach which one might adopt for a contemporary building, which would seek to be fabric first. Best practice is that actually if you take a fabric first approach and ignore the way the people use the building, you will cause more harm than good.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and in relation to the tests that you put out, that you set out, are clearly outweighed by public benefits. Now, the complication there is that the framework speaks about significant public benefits and public benefits, doesn't it? Is that clear?
We think so.
In H3, you refer back to H3.
Yes, we have. Equally, if you have suggestions as to the way you think we could make this policy better, we are very happy to hear them.
Yeah. And I'm going to say that's not my job. It's just to make sure that it's sound. And policy HE4 on non-designated heritage assets. Okay, that's the balanced judgment that you've got in HE4, isn't it? Okay. Okay, is there anything else that anyone would like to raise on the historic environment chapter?
We've no specific sort of comments or additional things to bring to your attention, Mum, but one thing we would like to say publicly is to thank Historic England for their engagement in this process. Mr. Robinson's been really very helpful to us in helping to finesse our plan and has provided us with a good degree of challenge and refinement. So we think the plan before you is much better for his involvement. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for attending this session. Okay, it's now 4 o'clock. Have we got any housekeeping matters?
Just a minor point, but obviously just because I appreciate I'm looking through different documents with the addendum. Would it be easier if we actually just reissue the scheduled modifications document clean with all these other comments, because only because I'm flicking to two, but it's up to you, Mum.
Yeah,
It's just, yeah,
well,
it's
it
just,
probably would,
it-
and I.
and we're quite happy to do that.
Over and
We're quite happy to do that. We're keeping the thing, and obviously we can incorporate these changes into that document to kind of bring it up to date. Obviously, it's a live document, Mum.
it should, yeah,
So
it should be,
it just, this might be easy for all parties because it is complicated. I've
Yeah, yeah,
got
yeah.
2 or 3 documents here on my desk, and
Yeah, no, I agree. So you'll produce one document and that will go on the website as a live document, yeah.
I think
Okay.
it should be,
No, I agree with
should
you.
be ready by probably midweek, obviously,
Okay.
because it's bank holiday, so probably by at least Thursday.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. It's just past 4 o'clock and we'll be back again week beginning the 2nd, won't we? Third. Yeah, week beginning the 2nd. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. This session's now over.